Hey guys, tonight tonight you find yourself standing on the edge of forever, or at least what feels like it. Before you stretches an immense expanse of sand, shimmering under a sun that seems to have a personal vendetta against anything that isn't, sand. You can feel the dry heat already, a tangible presence that prickles at your skin, and the air is thick with the taste of dust, ancient and fine. Tiny grains of it are probably already finding their way into your sandals, your pockets, places you won't discover until much, much later. This is the Giza Plateau, or a place very much like it, some 4,500 years ago. There's a stirring in the distance, a hum of activity that's just beginning to coalesce, the very first inklings of a project so audacious, so utterly bonkers, that it will defy belief for millennia. You, my friend, are about to witness, and in our sleepy, imaginative way, participate in the building of the Great Pyramids. Now, let's be clear. If this were real life, with the tools and medical facilities of the era, you probably wouldn't survive this. The heat stroke alone would be a strong contender, never mind the heavy lifting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small click for you, but it means the world to this humble narrator, trying to make history a little cozier. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Pop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see our little global community gathering. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint against the glare. The landscape isn't entirely barren, not yet. In the hazy distance to the east, you can just make out a ribbon of impossible green, a vibrant slash of life against the ochre monotony. That, of course, is the Nile, the lifeblood of this entire civilization. The reason anyone can even contemplate building something here, instead of, say, sensibly migrating somewhere with more cloud cover and readily available iced beverages. The river pulses with a slow, ancient rhythm, and even from this distance, you can almost feel its cool breath, a stark contrast to the furnace-like air of the desert proper. This is the Kemet, the Black Land, the fertile strip nourished by the annual inundation, the gift of the Nile that allows crops to flourish and a civilization to take root. Where you stand, however, is increasingly the Deshret, the Red Land, the domain of desert, of chaos, of Set, and, significantly, the land of the setting sun, the realm of the dead. It's a fitting place, then, for a project concerned with eternity. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, a mix of shifting sand and exposed bedrock. You're on slightly higher ground here, which is smart. You wouldn't want your monumental tribute to eternity to get soggy feet every time the Nile decided to overachieve during flood season. There's a gritty determination in the air, a sense that something immense is about to unfold. You can hear the distant, rhythmic thudding of tools, the murmur of voices speaking a language that sounds both alien and strangely musical, and the occasional braying of a donkey, the unsung hero of ancient logistics, no doubt already complaining about its workload. It's a symphony of nascent effort, the overture to an opera of stone and sweat. Think about the sheer audacity. You're in a world without dynamite, without steel cranes, without laser levels or CAD software. The most advanced piece of personal protective equipment is probably a linen loincloth, and a fervent prayer to whichever deity is in charge of not dropping large rocks on people. Yet, the people around you, or at least the ones in charge, are looking at this vast empty space and thinking, yes, this is where we shall erect a mountain of stone, perfectly aligned, impossibly massive, to ensure our divine ruler a smooth transition to the afterlife, and, not incidentally, to make sure absolutely everyone, for the next few thousand years, knows just how incredibly important he was. It's a level of ambition that's almost comical, if it weren't so breathtakingly real. The mainstream historical fact here is that the annual flooding of the Nile was not just a nice-to-have. It was the absolute cornerstone of Egyptian agriculture and, by extension, its civilization. This predictable inundation, lasting from roughly June to September, deposited a rich layer of fertile silt, renewing the land each year. This agricultural surplus was what freed up labor for massive state projects, like, you guessed it, pyramid building. Without that reliable food source, you simply wouldn't have the manpower, the organization, or the stability to even dream of such things. Now for a quirky, lesser-known tidbit. While we often associate the desert with lifelessness, the ancient Egyptians had a complex relationship with it. The Western Desert, where the pyramids are predominantly located, was indeed seen as the land of the dead. But desert regions also provided valuable resources like certain types of stone, semi-precious minerals, and hunting grounds for desert game. There were even oases, those surprising pockets of life that were vital for trade routes. So it wasn't just a terrifying void. It was a place of transition, resources, and spiritual significance. Some scholars even suggest that the very shape of the pyramid, that triangular form, might have been inspired by the natural conical shapes of desert hills or the Benben stone, a sacred conical stone linked to the creation myth and the sun god Ra. As you look around, you might notice the quality of the light. It's different here, sharper, somehow more ancient. The shadows are stark and long in the early morning, almost non-existent at midday, then stretching out again as the sun begins its descent towards the western horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and fiery red. You can imagine the foremen, the architects, the priests, all watching that daily solar journey, seeing in it a metaphor for life, death, and rebirth, a celestial model for the journey their pharaoh was destined to undertake. There's a scholarly debate concerning the exact climate of Egypt during the Old Kingdom, the period when the Giza pyramids were built. While it was certainly an arid region, some evidence suggests it might have been slightly wetter than it is today, with more vegetation cover in some areas, perhaps even supporting a wider range of wildlife closer to the pyramid sites. Pollen analysis from ancient sites and depictions in tomb art sometimes hint at a landscape that could sustain animals like giraffes or certain types of antelope in areas that are now hyper-arid. The extent of this difference is debated. We're not talking about lush rainforests suddenly appearing on the Giza Plateau, but even a marginal increase in rainfall could have had significant impacts on local ecosystems and the availability of resources like wood, which was always a precious commodity. Understanding this climatic context helps us paint a more accurate picture of the challenges and opportunities faced by the pyramid builders. It wasn't just sand everywhere, not entirely. You feel a light breeze kick up, carrying with it the scent of distant cooking fires, perhaps the first meal of the day for the early workers. It's a smell of wood smoke and something baking, maybe a simple flatbread. It's a reminder that for all the divine purpose and monumental scale, this is still a human endeavor, powered by human hands, sustained by human needs. The grandeur is undeniable, but so is the grit. You see a small group of men nearby, their dark skin already gleaming with sweat, meticulously clearing a patch of ground, using simple wooden tools to scrape away loose sand and scrub. Their movements are economical, practiced. There's no wasted effort. Every action is part of a larger, slowly unfolding plan. You get the sense that time moves differently here, measured not in minutes or hours, but in the slow drag of stone, the patient chipping away at a mountain, the gradual rise of an artificial horizon. It's a pace that requires immense patience, a generational commitment almost. And as the sun climbs higher, promising another day of relentless heat, the real work is about to begin. The stage is set, not with velvet curtains and spotlights, but with endless sand, unyielding stone, and the indomitable will of a people embarking on one of history's most audacious construction projects. You find yourself pondering the why of it all. Standing here, with the nascent Giza necropolis just beginning to take shape around you, the sheer scale of the undertaking is enough to make your head spin. Why would an entire society pour so much energy, so many resources, so much human effort into piling up millions of tons of stone in the middle of the desert? Was it just a pharaoh with an ego the size of, well, a pyramid? Well, yes, ego was certainly a part of the package. These weren't exactly monuments to humility. But to dismiss it as mere vanity would be to miss the incredibly deep and complex spiritual engine driving this colossal enterprise. You're looking at what is, in essence, the most elaborate, most expensive, and most enduring afterlife insurance policy ever conceived. It's about ensuring the pharaoh, and by extension Egypt itself, a smooth and prosperous eternity. At the heart of it all is the Egyptian understanding of the soul, or rather souls. It's not a simple single entity. You've got your Ka, which is your life force, your spiritual twin, created at the same moment you are and needing sustenance even after death. Think of it as your personal energy avatar that still gets hungry. Then there's your Ba, often depicted as a human-headed bird, which is more akin to your personality, your unique essence, able to travel between the tomb and the world of the living, popping out for a bit of fresh air or to check if the offerings are up to scratch. And finally, there's the Akh, the transfigured, effective spirit, the part that ascends to join the gods among the imperishable stars. For the pharaoh, who was already considered a living god, Horus incarnate, the stakes were even higher. His successful transition to the afterlife, his transformation into Osiris, king of the underworld, and his union with Ra, the sun god, in his eternal journey across the sky, wasn't just a personal matter. It was crucial for maintaining Ma'at. Ma'at is a concept you'll hear a lot about. It's truth, balance, order, harmony, law, morality, and justice all rolled into one. It's the divinely established order of the universe, and the pharaoh's primary job, both in life and in death, was to uphold it. If the pharaoh's afterlife journey went sideways, if he didn't successfully become a divine being in the great beyond, then Ma'at itself could be threatened, and chaos, or Isfet, could creep in. And nobody wants chaos, especially when it involves cosmic disorder, famine, and possibly the sun deciding not to rise. So, the pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a resurrection machine, a launching pad, a gateway to the stars, a monumental piece of spiritual technology designed to ensure the king's successful transformation and the continued stability of the entire cosmos. No pressure, then, on the architects and builders. The preservation of the physical body was paramount. That's where mummification comes in, that rather elaborate pickling process designed to keep the royal remains as intact and recognizable as possible so the Ka and Ba could find their way back to it. The pyramid, in its earliest forms, was the ultimate protective casing for this preserved body, and for the vast quantities of goods the pharaoh would need in the afterlife: food, drink, furniture, clothing, weapons, games, even model servants. You can imagine them packing for the longest trip ever. Do I need 3 or 4 ceremonial ostrich feather fans for eternity? Better pack 4. One of the key historical facts here is the existence of the pyramid texts. These are collections of magical spells and religious utterances inscribed on the internal walls of pyramids starting from the reign of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty, a bit after the Giza giants were completed, but reflecting beliefs that were much older. These texts were like a divine GPS and instruction manual for the deceased king, guiding him through the perilous journey of the Duat, the underworld, helping him overcome hostile demons, and ensuring his acceptance among the gods. They are the oldest known body of religious writings in the world, and they give us incredible insight into Egyptian cosmology and their vision of the afterlife. They weren't just pretty hieroglyphs. They were potent magic, words of power. Now for a quirky tidbit. Among the many fascinating features of Egyptian tombs are false doors. These weren't actual usable doors, but rather stylized stone representations of a doorway, often elaborately carved and inscribed with the deceased's name and titles. The idea was that the Ka, the spirit double, could pass through this magical portal to receive the offerings left in the offering chapel. It was a one-way street for spirits, a sort of spiritual cat flap, ensuring the deceased didn't miss out on their eternal picnic. You can just picture the Ka peeking through, checking if anyone remembered the good wine. The evolution of these afterlife beliefs and their direct translation into pyramid design is a subject of ongoing scholarly debate. For instance, the very first pyramid, the Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, designed by the legendary Imhotep, started as a simple rectangular mastaba tomb and was gradually built up in stages. Was this a pre-planned evolution towards a true pyramid, or a series of on-the-fly architectural audibles called by a genius? And what about the symbolism? Were the earliest pyramids primarily solar symbols, representing the petrified rays of the sun, god Ra, or a ramp to the heavens? Or were they more chthonic, connected to the primeval mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at creation? The truth is likely a bit of all of these, with emphasis shifting over time. The Giza pyramids, with their smooth, true pyramid shape, are often seen as highly solar in their symbolism. Gleaming white Tura limestone casings reflecting the sun's rays, almost like a beacon of divine power. You can imagine the priests and theologians huddled together, deep in discussion, perhaps over a clay tablet or a papyrus scroll, debating the finest points of eschatological doctrine. If the pharaoh encounters the great serpent Apep on Tuesday, should he recite spell 347 or 348b? The pressure to get it right was immense. The fate of the kingdom, the order of the cosmos, rested on the successful execution of this divine plan. This wasn't just building a big tomb. It was an act of cosmic maintenance. Consider the name for pyramid in ancient Egyptian. Mir. Its exact etymology is debated. Naturally, this is Egyptology, where debating is a national sport. But one interpretation links it to a word meaning place of ascent. This perfectly encapsulates the idea of the pyramid as a machine or structure facilitating the king's journey to the celestial realm. It wasn't just a final resting place, it was a launching pad. It's a far cry from our modern, often more secular views of death and remembrance. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition, a dangerous and crucial journey to a new state of being. And the pharaoh, as their divine representative, had to lead the way, armed with magic, sustained by offerings, and housed in a fortress of eternity. So, when you see the workers toiling under the sun, hauling stones, remember they weren't just building a monument for a king. They were, in their minds, participating in a vital cosmic ritual, ensuring the continued flow of life and order for everyone. It was a group project with the highest possible stakes. And you, standing here, are witnessing the very foundations of that belief system being translated into stone. So you've got this grand cosmic imperative. The pharaoh needs a first-class ticket to the afterlife, and that ticket looks suspiciously like a giant stone triangle. The next big question is, where do you park this thing? You can't just plonk a few million tons of rock down anywhere. The choice of location is critical. A blend of hard-nosed practicalities and deeply spiritual considerations. And as you look around the Giza Plateau, you start to see why this particular patch of desert real estate became the ancient world's most exclusive and enduring address. It's prime celestial real estate, if you will. Let's start with the practical stuff, because even divine projects have to contend with mundane realities. First and foremost, you need stone, and lots of it. The Giza Plateau itself is essentially a massive limestone quarry. The bulk of the core blocks for the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaura were hewn directly from the surrounding area. You can still see the evidence today, vast scooped-out sections where the stone was removed. This saved an immense amount of transportation effort. Imagine having to drag every single one of those multi-ton blocks from miles away. The project would have been even more mind-bogglingly difficult. So, proximity to raw materials? Check. Then there's the Nile. While the local limestone was great for the core, the really fancy stuff, the smooth white Tura limestone for the outer casing, and the massive granite blocks for the internal chambers and sarcophagi, had to come from further afield. Tura was just across the river, a relatively short boat trip. Aswan, the source of the granite, was much further south, hundreds of miles upriver. Having the Nile nearby, with a good spot to build a harbor or landing quay, was essential for transporting these specialized stones, not to mention food, timber, and other supplies for the workforce. You can almost picture the bustling activity at the ancient harbor. Boats laden with precious cargo arriving, the shouts of dock workers, the creak of ropes. Another crucial factor is the ground itself. You're building something that will weigh an estimated 5.9 million tons. In the case of Khufu's pyramid, you need an absolutely solid foundation. The Giza Plateau offers just that, a substantial shelf of bedrock, capable of supporting these immense structures without sinking or shifting. Try building a pyramid on, say, sandy soil or reclaimed swampland, and you'd have a very expensive, very leaning Tower of Giza. So, good, stable geology? Big check. Furthermore, the plateau is elevated, keeping the pyramids safe from the Nile's annual floodwaters. You don't want your pharaoh's eternal home turning into a seasonal island. And, of course, you need space. A pyramid doesn't exist in isolation. It's the centerpiece of a whole complex. Smaller Queen's pyramids, a mortuary temple where rituals for the deceased king would be performed, a causeway leading down to a valley temple near the Nile, boat pits containing disassembled funerary boats, and accommodation for the priests and personnel who would maintain the cult of the dead king for centuries. Giza offered a broad, relatively flat expanse that could accommodate all these ancillary structures. It was like planning a divine gated community. Now, let's shift to the cosmic and religious side of things, because for the ancient Egyptians, practicalities and spirituality were deeply intertwined. The most significant factor here is that Giza is on the west bank of the Nile. In Egyptian cosmology, west was intrinsically linked with death and the afterlife, as it was the direction where the sun god Ra died each evening before his journey through the underworld and his rebirth in the east at dawn. Almost all Egyptian funerary monuments, from simple graves to mighty pyramids, are found on the West Bank. It was the traditional place to bury the dead, the gateway to the Duat. Then there's the alignment. The pyramids of Giza are astoundingly accurately aligned to the cardinal directions, particularly true north. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, for instance, is oriented with an average error of just a few arcs minutes. Achieving this level of precision with the tools available is a testament to Egyptian surveying skills. This alignment wasn't just for show. It had deep religious significance, connecting the pyramid to the circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones, which never set, symbolizing eternity. The pharaoh hoped to join these stars after his death. A major historical fact is that the bedrock of the Giza Plateau is part of the Mokattam Formation, a layer of limestone that provides excellent structural support. Geologists have confirmed its stability, which was undoubtedly a key, if unrecorded in detail, factor for the ancient engineers. They might not have had modern soil mechanics, but they clearly had a good empirical understanding of what made for solid ground. For a quirky tidbit, there's the inventory stele, also known as the Stele of Khufu's daughter. This is a stone tablet found at Giza, probably carved much later, perhaps in the 26th dynasty, but claiming to record events from Khufu's time. It rather controversially states that Khufu found the Temple of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, beside the Sphinx, implying these structures, or at least the sacredness of the site, predated Khufu himself. While most Egyptologists consider the stele an archaizing piece of propaganda from a later era trying to legitimize a revived cult, it hints at the possibility that Giza might have been considered a sacred landscape even before the Great Pyramids were built, perhaps due to the prominent natural outcrop that would become the core of the Sphinx. It's a fascinating, if debated, suggestion of an even deeper history to this famous spot. One of the most enduring, and sometimes most contentious, scholarly debates revolves around the degree to which astronomical alignments, beyond the cardinal directions, influenced the precise layout of the Giza pyramids. The Orion correlation theory, proposed by Robert Bauval, suggests that the three main Giza pyramids were intentionally laid out to mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, with the Nile representing the Milky Way. While this theory has captured public imagination, it's not widely accepted in mainstream Egyptology, with many scholars pointing out inconsistencies, the need for anachronistic knowledge, or arguing that the correlation is coincidental or forced. The debate highlights the challenge of interpreting ancient intentions. Was it purely functional geometry, and basic solar stellar alignment for the afterlife journey? Or was there a more complex, symbolic celestial map being laid out on the desert floor? It's a reminder that while we can measure the stones, understanding the full depth of the minds that placed them there remains an ongoing quest. So, as you stand here, taking in the chosen spot, you can appreciate the genius of the selection. It's a place where the Earth provides a solid stage for a drama of cosmic proportions, where the river offers a lifeline for logistics, and where the sky itself seems to endorse the sacred endeavor. The architects weren't just looking for a flat bit of land. They were seeking a nexus point, a place where heaven and earth could meet, facilitated by their divine ruler and his monumental stairway. It's location, 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 with a healthy dose of divine inspiration. All right, so you've got your divine motivation and your prime piece of celestial real estate. Now comes the arguably even more daunting part. How do you actually design one of these colossal stone mountains? You can't just start piling rocks and hope for the best, unless your goal is the Leaning Tower of Oops. You need a plan, a blueprint, a deep understanding of angles, stresses, and the sheer stubbornness of stone. You're now peering into the minds of the ancient Egyptian architects and engineers, the masterminds behind these marvels, and discovering that their toolkits, while lacking laptops, were surprisingly sophisticated. This is where divine geometry meets down-to-earth practicality. Imagine the scene. Perhaps a shaded pavilion, a welcome respite from the relentless sun. Inside, a high official, maybe even the vizier himself, who in the Old Kingdom often held the title Overseer of all royal works, is conferring with his chief architect. For Khufu's Great Pyramid, tradition names this genius as Hemiunu, Khufu's nephew or cousin. You can almost see him, a man of immense intellect and authority, perhaps unrolling a papyrus scroll, though actual large-scale architectural blueprints, as we know them, haven't been found from this period. This lack of surviving detailed plans is one of Egyptology's great mysteries. Did they use them, and they simply haven't survived the millennia? Or did they rely on other methods, like scaled models, on-site sketches, or a highly developed system of proportional rules passed down through generations of master builders? What we do know is that they had a robust system of measurement. The primary unit was the royal cubit, roughly 52.4 centimeters, or about 20.6 inches, a bit longer than your average ruler. This cubit was further subdivided into 7 palms, and each palm into 4 digits. Having standardized units was absolutely crucial for a project involving thousands of workers and millions of blocks. Imagine the chaos if everyone was using their own forearm as a measuring stick. My cubit says this block is too short? Well, my cubit says your forearm is too short. One of the most critical aspects of pyramid design was achieving the correct slope for the sides. This wasn't just a matter of aesthetics. It was vital for structural stability. The Egyptians used a concept called the sekhed to define this slope. The sekhed was the horizontal distance in palms and digits for a vertical rise of 1 royal cubit. For example, the Great Pyramid of Khufu has a slope of roughly 51 degrees and 50 minutes, corresponding to a sekhed of 5 palms and 2 digits. This meant that for every cubit, the pyramid rose vertically. The side receded horizontally by 5 palms and 2 digits. It's a remarkably practical way to ensure a consistent angle across all 4 faces, using simple measurements that could be easily replicated on site. The historical fact here is that mathematical texts like The Rhind mathematical papyrus, though dating to a later period, it's believed to copy older Old Kingdom knowledge, demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians were proficient in practical geometry. They could calculate areas of triangles, rectangles, and circles, using a surprisingly good approximation for pi, around 3.16, volumes of cylinders and pyramids, and, crucially, the seek head of a pyramid. They weren't just guessing, they were calculating. It wasn't abstract theoretical math for its own sake, but applied mathematics aimed at solving real-world engineering problems. Now for a quirky, or rather ingenious tidbit. How did they lay out perfect right angles for the base of the pyramid, which, as we know, is aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions? One very plausible method, still used by surveyors in some parts of the world, involves the use of knotted ropes. Specialized surveyors, sometimes called harpedonaptai, or rope stretchers, in later Greek accounts describing Egyptian practices, could create a right angle using a rope divided by knots into sections with lengths in a 3.45 ratio. When stretched taut to form a triangle with these side lengths, it naturally forms a perfect right angle, thanks to the Pythagorean theorem, even if they didn't call it that. Imagine these skilled technicians under the watchful eye of the architect, meticulously laying out the vast square footprint of the pyramid, the foundation of everything to come. It's simple, elegant, and incredibly effective. The level of precision they achieved is mind-boggling. The base of the Great Pyramid, for instance, is almost a perfect square, with the sides averaging 230.3 meters, 755.6 feet, and the difference between the longest and shortest sides being less than 20 centimeters, about 8 inches. That's an error rate of less than 0.1%. Try doing that with a piece of string and a stick over that kind of distance, on uneven desert ground. It speaks to incredible skill and meticulous attention to detail. There's a fascinating scholarly debate concerning the extent to which the Egyptians intentionally incorporated more complex mathematical constants, like phi, the golden ratio, approximately 1.618, into their pyramid designs. Some researchers have pointed out that if you take the ratio of the slant height of Khufu's pyramid to half its base length, you get a value very close to phi. Similarly, some argue that the ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to twice its height is very close to pi. The question is, were these intentional, reflecting a sophisticated hidden knowledge of these mathematical constants? Or were they simply byproducts of using the Seked system and certain whole number proportions that naturally resulted in these values appearing? Many mainstream Egyptologists lean towards the latter, suggesting that while the Egyptians were skilled mathematicians for their time, attributing knowledge of phi, or a precise value of pi, as abstract concepts might be anachronistic. It's a classic correlation does not equal causation puzzle. Did they set out to build a phi pyramid? Or did they set out to build a stable, aesthetically pleasing pyramid using their known techniques, and it just so happened to embody those ratios? The jury is still out, and it makes for some wonderfully nerdy arguments. You might also consider how they translated the grand design into practical steps for the quarrymen and builders. Perhaps they used scaled models, as some tomb depictions suggest architects holding measuring rods against small models. Or maybe they had master templates for key angles and dimensions. At some sites, like the unfinished pyramid of Sekhemket or the trial passages near Khafre's pyramid, you can see practice carvings and initial layouts cut into the bedrock, suggesting they worked out problems and techniques on a smaller scale before committing to the main event. It's like a dress rehearsal for a symphony of stone. The architect, like Hemiunu, would have been a figure of immense importance, a combination of project manager, chief engineer, and possibly even high priest, given the sacred nature of the project. His vision, guided by the pharaoh's desires and the religious tenets of the time, would have been the driving force. You can imagine him, perhaps with a sighting instrument, a simple notched palm rib called a merkit, used with a plumb line for astronomical observations and surveying, making adjustments, checking alignments, his mind constantly working, translating abstract numbers and sacred ratios into tangible, colossal reality. The weight of responsibility must have been enormous. Get it wrong, and you're not just building a wonky monument. You're potentially jeopardizing the pharaoh's eternal life and the stability of the cosmos. No wonder they were so meticulous. This wasn't just construction. It was sacred geometry made manifest. All right, the divine blueprints are, if not exactly on paper, then firmly etched in the minds of the master builders and perhaps sketched out on ostraca or conveniently flat pieces of rock. The location is consecrated, surveyed, and probably already bustling with the very earliest stages of preparation. Now you face the monumental, quite literal, first hurdle: getting the stone. And we're not talking about picking up a few nice pebbles for a rock garden. We're talking about millions of tons of it, ranging from manageable chunks to colossal granite behemoths, destined for the king's final, highly secure chamber. You find yourself transported to the quarries, the noisy, dusty, and incredibly labor-intensive birthplace of the pyramids. This is where the hard rock life truly begins, and it's a testament to human ingenuity and sheer grit, using tools that look deceptively simple to our modern eyes. First, let's consider the menu of stones. The main course, forming the bulk of the pyramid's core, is limestone. Luckily, as you saw, the Giza Plateau itself is a giant limestone quarry. So for many of the core blocks, the commute was relatively short. This local limestone is a bit rougher, not exactly display quality, but perfect for the hidden heart of the structure. Then for the smooth, gleaming outer casing that would make the pyramids shine like polished jewels under the Egyptian sun, they needed a higher grade of limestone. This came from Tura, located on the eastern bank of the Nile, south of modern Cairo. Tura limestone is finer grained, whiter, and could be worked to a beautiful smooth finish. You can imagine the quarrymen at Tura taking extra care with these blocks, knowing they were destined for the pyramid's glorious exterior. But for the really heavy-duty stuff, the structural elements of the internal chambers, the portcullis slabs designed to seal the tomb, and, of course, the massive sarcophagus itself, they needed something tougher: granite. The primary source for this incredibly hard, igneous rock was Aswan, way down south, over 800 kilometers, about 500 miles upriver. Transporting these granite blocks, some weighing upwards of 50 tons, was a Herculean feat in itself, which we'll get to. But just extracting them from the earth was an epic undertaking. You might also find basalt, used for some of the temple flooring, a dark, hard volcanic rock, and alabaster, calcite, for finer details and vessels. Each type of stone presented its own challenges. Now picture the scene at a limestone quarry, perhaps on the Giza Plateau itself. It's a hive of activity. Gangs of workers, their bodies lean and muscular, are attacking the rock face. Their primary tools? Not jackhammers or pneumatic drills, but copper chisels and stone mauls or wooden mallets. Copper, being the hardest metal widely available to the Old Kingdom Egyptians, was functional, but soft by modern standards. Chisels would blunt quickly and require constant resharpening by on-site smiths working small charcoal forges. You'd hear the constant tink, tink, tink of copper on stone, a rhythmic, percussive sound echoing through the quarry. To extract a block of limestone, the workers would first meticulously carve deep channels or trenches into the bedrock on all sides of the desired block, isolating it from the parent rock. You can imagine them, crouched or lying in awkward positions, chipping away inch by painstaking inch. Once the channels were deep enough, they would then employ a rather clever trick. They'd cut slots along the base of the block and hammer in wooden wedges. These wedges would then be soaked with water. As the wood absorbed the water, it would swell, exerting immense pressure along the grain of the limestone, eventually causing the block to split away from the bedrock. It's a beautifully simple application of natural forces. No dynamite needed, just patience and a good supply of water and wood, the latter being a relatively scarce commodity in Egypt, which tells you how important this process was. Granite, however, was a different beast altogether. It's far harder than limestone. Copper chisels would barely scratch it. Here, the primary weapon was the dolerite pounder. Dolerite is an extremely hard, dense igneous rock, harder than granite. Workers would use rounded dolerite balls, some weighing several kilograms, to relentlessly bash and pulverize the granite surface. It was grueling, monotonous work. Imagine spending your day under the scorching sun, repeatedly lifting and smashing a heavy rock ball against an unyielding surface. They would pound out trenches around the desired block, or pound out lines of closely spaced holes. Some theories suggest they might have then used the same water-swollen wedge technique in these holes, or perhaps even a fire-setting technique, heating the rock with intense fires and then rapidly cooling it with water to cause it to crack. Though direct archaeological evidence for widespread fire setting in the Aswan granite quarries for pyramid blocks is less definitive than the evidence for pounding and wedging. The sheer scale of this quarrying operation is staggering. The Great Pyramid of Khufu alone is estimated to contain around 2.3 million blocks of stone, averaging about 2.5 tons each, with some of the granite blocks in the king's chamber weighing as much as 80 tons. That's an almost unimaginable amount of rock to hew from the earth, with what were essentially Stone Age tools supplemented by soft copper. A crucial historical fact is that copper was indeed the predominant metal for tools during the Old Kingdom. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, or arsenic, which is much harder, didn't come into widespread use in Egypt until the Middle Kingdom, well after the Giza pyramids were built. This reliance on copper meant a constant need for mining, smelting, casting, and, as mentioned, sharpening. It underscores the incredible human effort involved in every stage. For a quirky and rather poignant tidbit, you can visit the ancient quarries today, particularly the northern quarry at Aswan, home to the famous unfinished obelisk. This colossal obelisk, if completed, would have been the largest ever erected, weighing an estimated 1,200 tons. However, it cracked while still attached to the bedrock and was abandoned. It remains there, a silent testament to the ambition and the occasional heartbreaking failures of the ancient stone workers. You can see the pounder marks, the channels, the sheer scale of the intended monolith. It's like a snapshot of the quarrying process, frozen in time, a monument to almost was. You also find evidence in many quarries of practice marks or blocks that were partially worked and then abandoned, perhaps because a flaw was discovered in the stone or a worker made an error. These mistakes are invaluable clues for archaeologists, showing the methods and the learning process. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about the precise methods used for quarrying and, especially, shaping the massive granite beams and sarcophagi. While pounding with dolerite is well attested, some scholars propose that abrasive powders, like quartz sand, which is harder than granite, might have been used in conjunction with copper saws or drills to cut and shape the granite. The idea is that the copper tool itself wouldn't do much cutting, but it would hold the abrasive slurry against the stone, and the grit would do the actual work. Traces of such techniques are found in later periods, but the extent of their use in the Old Kingdom for pyramid construction is still discussed. How did they achieve such flat surfaces and precise angles on multi-ton granite boxes with just rocks and soft metal? The answer likely lies in a combination of incredible skill, immense patience, and possibly some techniques that are not yet fully understood. You can almost feel the dust in your throat, the sun beating down on your back, the ache in your muscles just by imagining the scene. The air would be filled with the rhythmic clang of tools, the shouts of foremen, the grating sound of stone being dragged. It's a world away from the serene image of the completed pyramids. This is the raw, gritty beginning, the violent birth of these eternal monuments from the very bones of the earth. And every single block, from the smallest internal piece to the largest granite lintel, began its journey here, wrested from the bedrock by human hands and sheer determination. You've witnessed the raw brute force of the quarries, the sheer determination etched into every extracted block. But who were the people wielding those dolerite pounders and copper chisels? Who were the ones whose sweat and skill would translate Hemiunu's grand designs from abstract geometry into a tangible mountain of stone? For too long, the popular imagination, fueled by Hollywood epics and a general sense of disbelief, pictured vast armies of suffering slaves whipped into submission under a cruel pharaoh's lash. Or, if you prefer your historical explanations with a side of intergalactic intervention, perhaps it was highly skilled alien interns, taking a break from designing crop circles to dabble in megalithic architecture. Well, you can gently shelve those dramatic, if somewhat insulting, notions. As you move away from the quarries and closer to the burgeoning construction site, you'd encounter something far more organized and far more human. The Pyramid Crew, a complex society of skilled tradesmen, laborers, and support staff. And no, their resumes likely didn't include fluent in Zeta Reticulum. You find yourself approaching what looks like a sprawling temporary town, bustling with life. This isn't a random scattering of tents. It's a planned settlement. Archaeologists, particularly Mark Lenner and his team, have excavated significant portions of just such a workers' village at Giza, known as Hayt el Ghurab, or the Lost City of the Pyramid Builders. This wasn't a slave camp. It was a highly organized urban center, complete with houses, bakeries, breweries, because hydration and morale are key even in ancient Egypt. Fish processing facilities, copperworking shops, and administrative buildings. There are even large dormitories or barracks, laid out in galleries, which could house a significant rotating workforce. It's a city built to build a city of the dead. The mainstream historical fact here is that the pyramid builders were not slaves in the traditional sense, but rather a workforce of Egyptian citizens. Many were skilled craftsmen, stonemasons, toolmakers, surveyors, carpenters. Wood was essential for sledges, levers, scaffolding, and rollers. Others were general laborers, conscripted perhaps through a corvée system, a form of national service or taxation through labor, particularly during the Nile's inundation period when agricultural work was impossible. These weren't downtrodden souls. Evidence from their tombs? Yes, the workers had their own cemeteries near the pyramids, a privilege not usually afforded to slaves. Shows they received medical care, including treatment for broken bones and even brain surgery in some cases. Though you might want to think twice before signing up for ancient brain surgery. They were also well fed. Analysis of animal bones from the workers' village shows they consumed vast quantities of beef, often the choicest cuts, mutton, goat, and fish, a diet far richer than that of the average Egyptian peasant. This was an investment. You don't feed your high-performance construction machinery on bread and water alone. Now for a delightful, quirky tidbit. All over the pyramid site, and even on some of the blocks hidden deep within the structures themselves, archaeologists have found graffiti left by the work gangs. These weren't idle doodles, but often labels identifying the crew, sometimes with rather colorful names. You might find markings like the Drunkards of Menkaure Gang or the Friends of Khufu Gang. These names, along with records of crew divisions and overseers, paint a picture of a highly organized workforce divided into ZA, singular SA, often translated as files or gangs, which were further subdivided into smaller groups. These gangs competed with each other, fostering a sense of pride and perhaps even friendly rivalry. It's like your company's softball team, but instead of a cheap trophy, you get to help build an eternal monument. These inscriptions sometimes also included dates, indicating the progress of construction. It's a wonderfully human touch, a little bit of ancient trash talk and team spirit preserved for millennia. Our gang laid more blocks than yours today, Neener. As you wander through this ancient construction hub, you see different groups at work. Here, a team is meticulously sharpening copper chisels, the sparks flying from a small forge, the smell of hot metal in the air. Over there, carpenters are shaping heavy timbers, perhaps for a new sledge or a section of scaffolding. The rhythmic thud of adzes and the scent of freshly worked wood filling the air. You see administrators with papyrus scrolls and reed pens, tallying supplies, recording work quotas, perhaps arguing with a foreman about the delivery schedule for more dolerite pounders. It's a complex logistical operation requiring immense coordination. Think of it as managing a modern megaproject, but without spreadsheets, email, or even the wheel for transport. The wheel was known but not widely used for heavy hauling in Old Kingdom Egypt. They preferred sledges for big loads. There is, of course, scholarly debate surrounding the precise nature and composition of the labor force. While the slave labor theory is largely debunked for the Giza pyramids, the exact system of recruitment and remuneration is still discussed. Was it primarily a corvée system, where peasants fulfilled an obligation to the state during the agricultural off-season? Or were there more permanent, skilled, salaried workers who formed the core of the operation? The likely answer is a combination. You'd have a permanent staff of highly skilled artisans, architects, and overseers, supplemented by a much larger, rotating body of laborers drawn from across Egypt. The extent to which these laborers were paid in wages versus rations and accommodation, and how voluntary their service was, are points of ongoing research. It probably wasn't a job you could easily turn down if the pharaoh's recruiters came knocking. but the evidence suggests they were treated as valuable assets, not expendable chattel. After all, you want your highly trained stonemason to be happy, or at least not actively sabotaging the divine afterlife machine. You can imagine the camaraderie, but also the hardships. This was dangerous, physically demanding work. Accidents must have been common. The sun was relentless, the dust pervasive. Yet, there was also a sense of purpose. They were building for their God King, participating in a project of national and cosmic significance. They were part of something vast, something that would endure. You see them, men, and perhaps some women in support roles, though direct evidence for female construction workers is scarce for this period. Their bodies powerful from years of labor, their faces weathered by the sun and wind. They might be joking with each other, sharing a water skin, or taking a brief rest in the shade of a half-finished wall. These are not anonymous drones. They are individuals, the unsung heroes whose collective effort raised these mountains of stone. They might not have had aliens to help, but they had something arguably more powerful: human ingenuity, organization, and a shared belief in the importance of their task. And frankly, if aliens had shown up, they'd probably have taken one look at the project management requirements and noped right back to their home galaxy. You want us to do what with how many rocks? And the deadline is when? Our union rep will be in touch. So the stones are quarried, wrestled from the earth by the sheer grit of the pyramid crew. You've seen the workers, not slaves or extraterrestrials, but skilled Egyptians, organized and, importantly, well-fed. Now comes the next monumental challenge: moving these blocks. We're talking about an average of 2.5 tons for the core blocks of Khufu's pyramid, and some of the granite behemoths destined for the inner chambers tipped the scales at a staggering 50 to 80 tons. That's like trying to move a small herd of elephants, or your Uncle Barry after Thanksgiving dinner, without the benefit of cranes, trucks, or even the widespread use of the wheel for heavy transport. You are about to witness a masterclass in heavy lifting, ancient Egyptian style, a symphony of sledges, sweat, and some surprisingly clever physics. You find yourself on a specially prepared trackway, leading from the local Giza quarries towards the rising pyramid. The ground here isn't just loose sand. It's been leveled and compacted, perhaps even reinforced with wooden beams, or a surface of tafla clay, a kind of desert clay that can be wetted and packed hard. The aim is to create as smooth and low-friction a path as possible. In the distance, you see a large team of men, perhaps 100 or more, arranged in disciplined rows, straining at thick ropes made of papyrus or palm fibers. Their muscles are taut, their bodies gleaming with sweat under the relentless sun. They are pulling a massive wooden sledge, upon which rests a multi-ton block of limestone, freshly hewn and still bearing the marks of the quarry. The sledge itself is a masterpiece of simplicity and strength. Two long wooden runners, perhaps curved up slightly at the front, with crossbeams to support the stone. No wheels. Wheels, while known to the Egyptians for things like potter's wheels and some small toys or carts from later periods, were not practical for hauling such immense concentrated loads over uneven or soft ground. The pressure exerted by a wheel on a small contact point would have caused it to sink disastrously. A sledge, however, distributes the weight over a much larger surface area, allowing it to glide, albeit with considerable effort. As the men pull, their movements are synchronized, perhaps to the rhythm of a chant, or the beat of a drum set by a foreman. Heave, ho, heave, ho. It's a primal sound, a chorus of human effort against the inertia of stone. You notice something crucial happening at the very front of the sledge. A worker is walking just ahead, carrying a jar, and he's carefully pouring water onto the sand directly in the path of the runners. This isn't just to cool things down or keep the dust at bay, though those might be minor side benefits. This is ancient applied physics. The key historical fact here comes from a depiction in the Middle Kingdom tomb of Jehuti-Hotep, some centuries after the Giza pyramids, but illustrating long-standing techniques. It famously shows a colossal statue, far larger than any pyramid block, being moved on a sledge by 172 men. And right there at the front is a man pouring liquid, presumed to be water, in front of the sledge. For a long time this detail was noted, but its full significance perhaps wasn't scientifically appreciated. This brings us to our quirky, or rather, scientifically validated, tidbit. In 2014, a team of physicists led by Daniel Bohn at the University of Amsterdam published a study in Physical Review Letters. They conducted experiments and found that adding a specific, small amount of water to sand significantly stiffens it and dramatically reduces the sliding friction. Too little water, and the sand still piles up in front of the sledge. Too much water, and you create a kind of quicksand effect, increasing friction. But get the water content just right, around 2% to 5% by volume, and the sand becomes firm, allowing the sledge to glide much more easily. The study estimated that this technique could reduce the pulling force required by as much as half. Suddenly, those depictions of water pourers make perfect sense. The ancient Egyptians weren't just guessing. They had empirically figured out the optimal way to move heavy objects across desert sand. It's a beautiful example of ancient ingenuity, a low-tech solution to a high-tonnage problem. You can almost hear the collective aha moment from 4,500 years ago. You watch the slow, steady progress. It's not fast. Every inch gained is a victory. The ropes creak and groan under the immense strain. Foremen shout encouragement and instructions, ensuring the pull is even, that the sledge stays on its prepared path. You might see other teams preparing the way further ahead, smoothing out rough patches, perhaps laying down temporary wooden planks over particularly tricky sections, or when turning a corner. For the truly massive granite blocks, coming all the way from Aswan, the journey was even more epic. They would have been quarried, wrestled onto sledges, dragged to the Nile, loaded onto specially constructed barges, themselves feats of engineering, capable of carrying such immense weights, and then sailed or rowed downriver, or upriver, depending on the prevailing winds and currents, which could make for a very long trip. Upon arrival at the Giza harbor, they'd be offloaded back onto sledges for the final overland haul to the pyramid site. Imagine the logistics of coordinating that multi-stage, multi-hundred-mile journey for a single 80-ton block. It's enough to make a modern project manager break out in a cold sweat and reach for a very large cup of coffee. There's a scholarly debate concerning the exact nature of the haulageways and the extent of their construction. Were they temporary paths, constantly being remade, or more permanent, paved roads for the duration of the pyramid's construction? Evidence for extensive paved ramps leading to the pyramid is less clear than for ramps on the pyramid, which we'll get to. Some suggest that for the overland journey from local quarries, they might have simply cleared and compacted the desert surface, perhaps with a top dressing of Nile mud or Tafla clay, and relied heavily on the water on sand technique. For longer, more frequently used routes, more robust tracks might have been built. The details are still being pieced together from archaeological clues and experimental archaeology. You might also see evidence of levers being used, not necessarily for the long-distance haul, but for maneuvering blocks into position on the sledge, or for getting a stuck sledge moving again. A long, sturdy wooden pole, a few strategically placed smaller rocks as fulcrums, and a team of men could generate enormous lifting or nudging force. It's all about understanding leverage and mechanical advantage, even without a physics textbook. It's give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. Or at least this rather stubborn block of limestone. The sheer human power involved is breathtaking. These weren't mythical giants or muscle-bound superheroes, just ordinary men, working together with extraordinary coordination and stamina. You can imagine the calluses on their hands, the ache in their backs at the end of the day, but also, perhaps, a sense of pride in their strength and their contribution. They weren't just moving stone. They were moving mountains, one painstaking pull at a time, all fueled by bread, beer, and an unwavering belief in the pharaoh's divine destiny. And a little bit of cleverly applied water. The blocks, some weighing as much as a family car, others the equivalent of a small train locomotive, have been quarried with sweat and ingenuity. They've been hauled across the desert on sledges, lubricated by that clever application of water on sand you just witnessed. Now they've arrived at the foot of the ever-growing pyramid. But a pyramid, by its very nature, goes up. And getting those colossal chunks of limestone and granite from ground level to potentially hundreds of feet in the air without the aid of modern cranes is perhaps the most debated, most speculated upon aspect of pyramid construction. You're now standing at the heart of one of ancient engineering's greatest mysteries, the ramp, or ramps, or something else entirely. Welcome to Ramp It Up, the Great Debate. Let's be clear, the ancient Egyptians almost certainly used ramps. It's the most logical and widely accepted method. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing some 2,000 years after the Giza pyramids were built, but supposedly drawing on local priestly accounts, mentions the use of machines made of short wooden planks for lifting stones, possibly referring to levers or rockers, but also implies the construction of ramps. However, he's a bit vague on the specifics, and his sources were already ancient to him. The real challenge is that no definitive large-scale construction ramp for the Great Pyramid has survived intact, nor have any definitive Egyptian texts or blueprints detailing its exact design. This lack of direct evidence has led to a fascinating and sometimes heated array of theories. It's like an ancient engineering cold case, with everyone trying to reconstruct the weapon from circumstantial clues. You look up at the rising structure. Imagine the scene. Teams are still hauling blocks on sledges to the base. But how do they ascend? One popular theory is the straight external ramp. Picture a massive earthen or rubble-filled ramp sloping gently upwards from the desert floor, directly to the current working level of the pyramid. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramp would have to become longer and longer to maintain a manageable gradient, probably no more than 8 or 10%. For the Great Pyramid, which reached a height of about 146.6 meters, 481 feet. Such a ramp, if it extended all the way to the top, would have been incredibly long, perhaps over a mile, and would have contained a volume of material almost rivaling the pyramid itself. Disposing of such a colossal ramp afterwards would have been another huge undertaking. All right, lads, pyramids done. Now, who fancies dismantling that mountain of dirt we just built? A variation is the zigzagging or switchback ramp built on one or more sides of the pyramid. This would reduce the overall footprint of the ramp compared to a single long one, but it involves tricky corners for those multi-ton blocks on sledges. Imagine trying to parallel park an articulated lorry on a narrow sloping mountain path, but the lorry is made of stone and you're pulling it with ropes. Then there's the idea of a ramp that spiraled around the outside of the pyramid, like a giant stone roadway, corkscrewing its way to the top. This would keep the ramp contained within the pyramid's footprint, but it presents challenges in terms of surveying, maintaining the angle of the pyramid's sides accurately, and turning those heavy sledges on a continuous curve. Plus, it would cover the faces of the pyramid as it was being built, making it harder to align the casing stones. The crucial historical fact is that evidence of ramps has been found at other, smaller, or unfinished pyramid sites. For example, at the pyramid of Amenemhat I at Lisht, and at some of the Saqqara pyramids, remnants of construction ramps, often made of mud brick and rubble, have been identified. These tend to be shorter, direct ramps used for lower levels or supply ramps. This confirms the Egyptians knew how to build and use ramps, but doesn't definitively solve the puzzle for the immense height and scale of Giza. Now for a particularly intriguing and somewhat quirky piece of the puzzle: the internal ramp theory, most famously championed by French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin. Houdin proposed that after an initial external ramp was used for the lower third of the Great Pyramid, the builders switched to an internal ramp, a kind of tunnel or corridor that spiraled upwards inside the body of the pyramid, just behind the outer casing stones. This ramp would have allowed blocks to be hauled up internally, emerging at the working level. Small openings or notches at the corners, which Houdin identifies on the pyramid today, would have allowed teams to turn the blocks. One fascinating piece of potential supporting evidence came from a microgravimetric survey conducted in 1986 by a French team. They detected a curious anomaly inside Khufu's pyramid, a less dense, spiral-shaped feature, which they suggested could be the trace of such an internal ramp, now perhaps filled with debris or of a different construction density. It was like an X-ray hinting at a hidden structure. The great scholarly debate, of course, centers on which ramp theory, or combination of theories, or even non-ramp theories involving levers and counterweights, is the most plausible. Each has its proponents and detractors. External straight ramp, simple concept, but massive material volume and length issues for great heights. Zigzag ramp, more compact, but complex turns and stability concerns on the pyramid's face. External spiral ramp, contained footprint, but surveying difficulties and access to faces. Houdin's internal ramp, elegant solution for height, explains some anomalies, less external material. However, it requires very precise internal construction, good ventilation and lighting for workers inside, and direct archaeological proof remains elusive, though tantalizing. Some Egyptologists are skeptical, pointing to the lack of direct precedent or textual evidence for such a complex internal structure. Levering techniques. Some scholars, like the late Peter Hodges, an engineer and stonemason, suggested that levers, rockers, and cribbing, stacks of wooden beams, could have been used to lift blocks course by course, especially for the upper levels, where a massive ramp becomes increasingly impractical. This would be slower, but require far less ramp material. It's entirely possible, even probable, that the Egyptians used a combination of methods. Perhaps a broad external ramp for the lower, bulkier part of the pyramid, where most of the stone volume lies. Then, as the pyramid rose and the working area shrank, they might have switched to smaller, more agile ramps, or increasingly relied on levers and other lifting devices for the upper courses and the capstone. You can imagine the project managers having intense debates. Okay, Hemiunu, the big ramp got us to 50 meters, but the slope is getting ridiculous. Phase 2 ideas, anyone? No, Ra. We are not asking the aliens for their anti-gravity tech. You stand there, looking at the partially built behemoth, and try to visualize these different scenarios. The sheer human effort is staggering, no matter which method they used. Teams of men, straining, chanting, inching these massive stones upwards against gravity, against the friction of the ramp surface, under the watchful eyes of architects and foremen who are constantly checking angles, alignments, and progress. The noise, the dust, the sweat. It's a construction site of epic proportions. The debate over the ramps is a testament not to Egyptian incompetence, but to the sophistication of their achievement. They clearly solved the problem, and so effectively that we're still arguing about exactly how they pulled off such an incredible feat. It's a good reminder that sometimes the most elegant solutions are the ones that leave the fewest traces. All right, you've got your stones, you've got your hotly debated methods for hauling them upwards. But before you even think about stacking those multi-ton blocks into a recognizable pyramid shape, there's a foundational step that is absolutely critical, yet often overlooked in its sheer genius. Ensuring the base is perfectly, almost unbelievably, level. You can't build a stable structure that's nearly 150 meters tall on a wonky foundation. It would be like trying to build a skyscraper on a trampoline. So you find yourself back at the very beginning, before the first course of stones is laid, witnessing the meticulous, almost obsessive, precision with which the ancient Egyptians prepared the ground for their monuments to eternity. Their pursuit of level best is truly astounding. You're standing on the Giza Plateau, at the designated spot for, let's say, Khufu's Great Pyramid. The area has been cleared of loose sand and debris, exposing the underlying bedrock. But this bedrock isn't naturally flat like a billiard table. It undulates, it slopes, it has bumps and dips. The first task of the surveyors and site engineers is to create a perfectly horizontal plane across an area that will eventually cover over 13 acres, or about 5.3 hectares. That's roughly the size of 10 American football fields. Imagine trying to get that perfectly level using only simple tools. The mainstream historical fact here is the incredible precision achieved. The base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu is astonishingly level. Over its entire perimeter of more than 920 meters, 3,000 feet, the southeast corner is, by most modern measurements, only about 1.5 to 2 centimeters, less than an inch, higher than the northwest corner. The deviation across the entire vast square is incredibly small. This level of accuracy, across such a large, uneven natural surface, is a monumental feat of ancient surveying and engineering. It's more level than the floor in my apartment, and my apartment doesn't have to support nearly 6 million tons of stone for 4.5 millennia. So, how did they do it? While definitive textual accounts from the Old Kingdom are lacking, one of the most ingenious and widely accepted theories involves the use of water. Picture this. The workers, under the direction of skilled surveyors, excavate a network of shallow, interconnected trenches across the entire area designated for the pyramid's base. These trenches would essentially form a grid. Then they would fill these trenches with water. Water, as we all know from that frustrating experience of trying to hang a picture straight without a spirit level, naturally finds its own level. The surface of the water in all the connected trenches would create a perfectly horizontal plane. Once the water settled, the surveyors would mark the water level on the sides of the trenches at numerous points. Then, the water would be drained, and the truly backbreaking work would begin. Workers would then have to meticulously chisel and cut down all the high spots of the bedrock across the entire expanse, bringing the entire surface down to the marked waterline. Any areas that were too low would either have to be filled with tightly fitted stone blocks, or the builders might have chosen to incorporate a slightly higher natural outcrop of bedrock into the core of the pyramid, as is indeed the case with the Great Pyramid, where a natural knoll forms part of its core. This not only saved on quarrying and placing some core blocks, but also provided an even more stable anchor. It's like, nature gave us a bit of a lump here, might as well use it. Less work for us, and it's already pre-leveled by, geology. This brings us to our quirky, or rather elegantly simple tidbit. While the water-filled trench method is a strong contender, some evidence for it might come from the unfinished causeway of the Pyramid of Neferefre at Abu Sir. Archaeologists found what appear to be remains of such leveling trenches there. It's a practical, low-tech, and highly effective way to achieve a large-scale level surface. You don't need lasers or GPS. You just need water, some digging tools, a lot of patience, and a good understanding of basic physics. You can almost see the foreman squinting at the water lines, shouting instructions. A bit more off on that side, user calf. We're trying to build for eternity here, not a slightly tilted shed. Of course, there's a scholarly debate concerning the exact methods and the combination of techniques used. Was it solely water-filled trenches? Or did they also employ sophisticated sighting instruments, like the Merket, a plumb line with a wooden handle, and the Bay, a notched palm rib staff, to transfer levels across distances? Perhaps they used A-frame levels, which consist of an A-shaped wooden frame with a plumb line hanging from the apex. When the plumb line aligns with a mark at the center of the crossbar, the base of the A-frame is level. These are simple but effective tools. It's highly probable that a combination of techniques was used. Perhaps initial rough leveling using water, followed by finer adjustments and checks using sighting instruments and A-frame levels across a grid system. The precision achieved suggests an almost obsessive attention to detail, whatever the exact tools. The debate isn't so much if they leveled it, but the nitty-gritty of how they achieved such incredible results with the toolkit available. You can imagine the scene. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of workers toiling away, chipping at the bedrock with their copper chisels and stone mauls. The sound would be incessant, a constant chipping and grinding. Dust would fill the air. It's not glorious work, like placing the capstone, but it's utterly fundamental. Without this perfectly prepared stage, the entire performance of pyramid building would falter. You might see surveyors constantly rechecking, using long straight edges made of wood, perhaps with plumb lines, to ensure every section is brought down to the required plane. There's no room for close enough. It has to be perfect, or as near to perfect as humanly possible. Think about the implications. This meticulous leveling wasn't just for stability. It was also crucial for the layout of the first course of stones. Once the base was level, the architects could then accurately mark out the precise square outline of the pyramid, ensuring the sides were the correct length and the corners were true right angles. Using those 3.45 ratio knotted ropes we talked about earlier, every subsequent course of stone would depend on the accuracy of this initial layout. A tiny error at the base would be magnified enormously by the time you reached the top. It's the ultimate example of measure twice, cut once, scaled up to monumental proportions. They were, quite literally, laying the groundwork for eternity, and they knew it had to be flawless. And as you stand on this perfectly leveled bedrock, ready for the first stones, you can't help but marvel at the dedication to precision that underpins the entire colossal endeavor. The foundation is set. A vast, almost perfectly level stone canvas, painstakingly prepared on the Giza bedrock. You've seen the Herculean effort of quarrying and transporting the blocks, and you've pondered the great ramp debate. Now it's time for the main event, the actual construction, the layer-by-layer ascent of these artificial mountains. You find yourself amidst the clang of tools, the shouts of foremen, and the rhythmic grunts of men as they maneuver colossal stones into place. This is ancient Tetris on an epic scale, a slow, meticulous climb towards the heavens. You watch as a team, using ropes and perhaps sturdy wooden levers, coaxes a massive limestone block, fresh from the local quarry, or delivered via a ramp, towards its designated spot in the current course. These are the core blocks, the rough-hewn heart of the pyramid. They aren't as finely dressed as the outer casing stones will be. Their primary job is to provide bulk and stability. Even so, they are fitted together with remarkable care. The gaps between them are often minimal, sometimes filled with a thin layer of gypsum mortar, which acted more as a lubricant to help slide the stones into place and to provide a level bed rather than a strong binding agent like modern cement. The sheer weight of the stones pressing down was what held the structure together. The mainstream historical fact is that pyramids were generally built in accretional layers or courses, rising from the foundation upwards. For the Great Pyramid, there are about 210 courses of stone, decreasing in height as the pyramid rises. The lowest courses have blocks over 1.5 meters, nearly 5 feet, tall, while the uppermost courses near the apex might be closer to 0.5 meters, about 20 inches, tall. This makes sense. It's easier to lift smaller blocks to greater heights. The core would typically be built up slightly ahead of the fine outer casing stones. You can imagine it like building a giant, multi-layered cake, except the layers weigh several tons each, and you really don't want it to lean. As you observe the process, you might notice some of the blocks have small, rough protrusions left on their faces. These are known as bosses. This brings us to a quirky and practical tidbit. These bosses are thought to have served as handling points. Ropes could be looped around them, or wooden levers could be engaged against them to help lift, pull, and maneuver the blocks into their final position. Once the block was set, these bosses were often, but not always, chiseled off, especially on the casing stones where a smooth finish was desired. However, on some core blocks, or in less visible areas, they might be left in place. Archaeologists love finding these bosses because they are telltale signs of the construction process, little clues left by the ancient builders. It's like finding the faint pencil marks on a master artist's finished painting. The teams of workers operate with a practiced efficiency. There are the haulers, bringing the stones, the setters, maneuvering them into place, and the masons, doing any final trimming or fitting. It's a coordinated dance of immense weights and human effort. You might see a foreman perched on a nearby block, sighting along a line, gesticulating, ensuring each stone is perfectly aligned with its neighbors and with the overall plan. They're not just randomly stacking rocks. They are following a precise geometric blueprint, course by course. This leads to an interesting scholarly debate. To what extent were the blocks, particularly the fine Tura limestone casing stones, dressed to their final precise shape before being lifted into place, versus being rough cut and then finished in situ after being placed on the pyramid? Evidence suggests a combination. Core blocks were likely shaped sufficiently at the quarry to fit reasonably well. For the casing stones, which had to fit together with razor-thin precision, it's probable that they were mostly shaped at the quarry or at a workshop near the pyramid's base. But the final, perfect fitting and smoothing of the outer surface might have been done after they were set in place, working from the top down as any scaffolding or ramps were removed. Imagine masons suspended on ropes or simple wooden platforms, meticulously chiseling and polishing the angled face of the pyramid to create that seamless, gleaming surface. This would also ensure that any minor dings or damage incurred during transport and placement could be smoothed away. You can visualize the pyramid growing, almost organically, from the desert floor. Each day, more stones arrive, more stones are set. The working surface gets progressively smaller as it rises. The logistics become more challenging. Getting water for the workers, tools, and perhaps mortar to those higher levels would require its own system of organization. The shadow cast by the growing structure lengthens with each passing season. From a distance, it must have been an astonishing sight, this man-made mountain steadily climbing towards the sky, a testament to sustained effort over many years. The construction of the Great Pyramid is estimated to have taken around 20 to 27 years. That's a significant portion of a pharaoh's reign, a continuous, massive national project. Consider the incredible precision required, not just for the outer casing, but also for the internal passages and chambers, which were being constructed concurrently as the pyramid rose. These had to be perfectly aligned and integrated within the core structure. You can't just build the shell and then decide to pop in a grand gallery later. The King's Chamber in Khufu's pyramid, for example, is a masterpiece of granite construction, with massive roof beams designed to relieve pressure, all built while the rest of the pyramid was rising around it. The architects and builders were working in 3 dimensions, to incredibly fine tolerances, on a monumental scale. It's like assembling a giant, incredibly complex piece of furniture, where every piece has to fit perfectly, but the instructions are partly lost, and you're inventing some of the tools as you go. And if you get it wrong, the divine CEO's eternal afterlife might be compromised, which is generally bad for your career prospects. The air is filled with the sounds of construction, the dull thud of mallets on chisels, the scrape of stone on stone, the creak of timbers, the distant shouts of work gangs, and perhaps the rhythmic chanting of men hauling a particularly heavy block up a ramp. It's a symphony of effort, a testament to what organized human labor, even with relatively simple tools, can achieve when driven by a powerful belief and a strong central authority. Layer by layer, the dream is taking shape, a stairway to the stars, built by mortal hands. The core of the pyramid, that colossal assembly of millions of rough-hewn limestone blocks you've just seen being meticulously stacked, is undeniably impressive in its sheer bulk. But the ancient Egyptians, particularly the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, weren't just going for big and lumpy. They were aiming for big, beautiful, and blindingly brilliant. You now find yourself witnessing the stage where the pyramid transforms from a mere pile of rocks into a gleaming, geometric marvel. It's time for the pyramid to get dressed to impress, clad in a smooth, polished mantle of fine white limestone that would have shone like a beacon across the desert landscape. As the core structure rises, course by course, another specialized team of masons begins their work, often starting from the top and working their way down as the construction ramps or scaffolding are gradually removed. These are the artisans responsible for the casing stones. These weren't just any old limestone. They were quarried from Tura, and sometimes Masara, on the opposite bank of the Nile. This Tura limestone was prized for its fine grain, its creamy white color, and its ability to take a very smooth polish. You can imagine the quarrymen at Tura selecting only the best, most flawless stone for this prestigious purpose, knowing it would be the very skin of the pharaoh's eternal home. The casing stones were cut with astonishing precision, far more accurately than the core blocks. They were generally rectangular, but with their outer face angled to match the precise slope of the pyramid, that sect we talked about earlier. Their joints, where one casing stone met its neighbor, were incredibly fine, sometimes less than a millimeter wide, so tight you could barely slip a piece of papyrus between them. Modern masons often marvel at this precision, achieved without modern cutting tools or laser guides. It speaks to an almost obsessive dedication to perfection. The mainstream historical fact is that the Great Pyramid of Giza, like its neighbors and many other pyramids, was originally covered in these highly polished Tura limestone casing stones. Herodotus described the Great Pyramid as being smooth and jointed in the most perfect manner. Strabo, another classical writer, visiting in the 1st century BCE, mentioned it still largely retained its casing, gleaming in the sun. Unfortunately, most of this brilliant white casing is now gone. A massive earthquake in 1303 CE is believed to have loosened many of the stones, and subsequently, they were systematically quarried away over the centuries to build mosques, fortresses, and houses in nearby Cairo. It's like someone stripped the beautiful siding off a historic mansion to build a garden shed. Only a few casing stones remain at the very base of Khufu's pyramid, and a larger section near the summit of Khafre's pyramid, giving us a tantalizing glimpse of their original splendor. Now for a quirky, or rather dazzling tidbit. Imagine what these pyramids must have looked like when newly completed and fully cased. They wouldn't have been the rough, stepped, sand-colored structures we see today. Instead, you would have seen 4 perfectly smooth triangular faces, clad in brilliant white limestone, reflecting the Egyptian sun with an almost blinding intensity. They would have appeared as pure geometric forms, almost abstract sculptures on a colossal scale. Some scholars suggest that certain pyramids might have even had their pyramidia, the capstones, gilded or made of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, which would have caught the first and last rays of the sun, adding to the spectacle. It wasn't just a tomb. It was a monumental piece of land art, a symbol of divine power and purity, visible for miles around, perhaps even from across the Nile Delta on a clear day. It would have been an awe-inspiring, almost otherworldly sight. Sunglasses, anyone? The pharaoh's new house is a bit bright. You watch the masons at work on the casing. Each block, weighing several tons, has to be maneuvered into place with incredible care to avoid chipping its finely dressed edges. They are likely using levers and ropes, and perhaps a thin slurry of gypsum mortar to help slide the stone into its final position and to fill any minute imperfections in the bed. Once a section of casing stones is in place, the final dressing and polishing of the outer surface would occur. This might involve teams of men meticulously rubbing the surface with quartzite rubbing stones and abrasive powders, like fine sand, mixed with water, gradually smoothing out any irregularities and bringing the limestone to a high polish. It would have been painstaking, repetitive work, requiring immense patience and a keen eye for detail. There's a scholarly debate concerning the method by which the casing stones were laid to achieve such tight joints and a uniform slope. Were they fully pre-cut to the exact angle and dimensions before being lifted, relying on incredibly precise quarrying and transportation? Or were they left slightly oversized, placed in position, and then trimmed and dressed to the final angle in situ? Many Egyptologists favor the latter or a combination. Mark Lenner, for instance, suggests that the stones were mostly shaped, but with a little extra material, then set, and the final plane of the face was achieved by dressing them from the top down. This would allow for fine adjustments and ensure a perfectly continuous, smooth surface across hundreds of stones. Imagine drawing a line from the apex to the base corner and then ensuring every single stone along that line met that plane perfectly. The skill involved is just staggering. You can picture a master mason overseeing this delicate operation, his experienced hands running over the surface of a newly polished section, his eye catching the slightest imperfection. There's a pride in this work, a dedication to achieving a flawless finish. This isn't just about keeping the rain out. It's about creating a perfect, sacred vessel, a radiant symbol of Ma'at, order and perfection, reflecting the perfection of the cosmos and the divine nature of the pharaoh. The whiteness of the Tura limestone itself likely had symbolic significance, perhaps representing purity, light, and the sacred. Consider the visual impact. Against the backdrop of the golden desert sand and the deep blue Egyptian sky, these gleaming white giants would have been breathtaking. They weren't just tombs, they were statements. Statements of power, of divine authority, of engineering prowess, and of an unwavering belief in the afterlife. The light itself would have played off the surfaces, changing throughout the day, from the sharp glare of noon to the softer hues of sunrise and sunset. It's a far cry from the weathered, venerable, but somewhat somber appearance they have today. To truly appreciate them, you have to mentally reclad them in their original brilliant attire. And it wasn't just the big pyramids at Giza. Many other pyramids, both earlier and later, were also cased in fine limestone. The tradition continued for centuries. It was the gold standard for pyramid finishing. The effort and resources poured into quarrying, transporting, dressing, and placing these casing stones were immense, highlighting just how important this final, perfect appearance was to the ancient Egyptians. They weren't cutting corners, even on the bits you couldn't easily see from the ground. It was about creating a perfect stairway to the stars, and that stairway needed to be impeccably dressed. The pyramid has risen, course by massive course. The core is a mountain of stone, and the gleaming white Tura limestone casing, meticulously fitted and polished, is now transforming that mountain into a radiant, geometric jewel. But a pyramid isn't truly complete until it has its crown. You now find yourself anticipating the placement of the very final stone, the one that will sit at the pinnacle, the tip-top of this colossal structure, the pyramidion. This wasn't just any stone. It was the capstone, the culmination of decades of effort, a piece imbued with immense symbolic and religious significance. It was, quite literally, the crowning achievement. Imagine the scene as the pyramid nears completion. The working platform at the summit has shrunk to a tiny area. The view from up here, nearly 500 feet above the Giza Plateau, must be utterly breathtaking. A panoramic sweep of desert, fertile land, and the distant ribbon of the Nile. Only the most skilled and trusted workers would be involved in this final, delicate phase. The pyramidion itself, though small compared to the rest of the pyramid, was still a substantial piece of stone, often made of a special high-quality material, like fine limestone, basalt, or even granite. For the Great Pyramid of Khufu, its pyramidion is long gone, but based on others that have survived from different pyramids, it would likely have been a miniature pyramid shape, perfectly proportioned to cap the larger structure. The mainstream historical fact is that pyramidia, the plural of pyramidion, have been found from various pyramid sites, though not all have survived. A notable example is the black basalt pyramidion of Amenemhat III, from his pyramid at Dashur, the Black Pyramid. It's beautifully carved with religious inscriptions and depictions of the king offering to gods, and it's now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. These inscriptions often invoke the sun god Ra, or Re-Horakti, and speak of the king beholding the beauty of the god. This tells us that the pyramidion was seen as a focal point for the pyramid's solar and celestial connections. This brings us to a glittering, quirky tidbit. As mentioned before, there's strong speculation, supported by some ancient texts and the nature of the material often used, like the dark polished basalt which would stand out, that many pyramidia were once covered in electrum or gold. Electrum is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, which the Egyptians prized for its beautiful pale yellow or whitish sheen. If the main body of the pyramid was a brilliant, reflective white, imagine the very tip catching the sun's rays, gleaming like a star, a divine beacon signaling the pyramid's sacred purpose. It would be the first part of the pyramid to be touched by the sunrise, and the last to be illuminated by the sunset, a potent symbol of the king's journey with the sun god. It's like putting the ultimate shiny cherry on top of your monumental afterlife sundae. Forget a gold watch for retirement. I want a gold-tipped mountain. Lifting and placing the pyramidion would have been an engineering challenge in itself, given the height and the limited working space. How did they do it? They certainly couldn't use a massive ramp all the way to that tiny point. Most likely, they employed a system of levers, ropes, and perhaps a carefully constructed wooden scaffold, or a cribbing, around the apex. The pyramidion might have been slid up the final few courses or carefully hoisted. It would have required immense precision and coordination to seat it perfectly. You can imagine the hushed anticipation as this final piece was maneuvered into place, the culmination of perhaps 20 years or more of labor. The moment it settled, perfectly aligned, must have been one of profound satisfaction and religious awe. There's a scholarly debate concerning the exact religious symbolism and function of the pyramidion. Was it primarily a solar symbol representing the Benben stone, the sacred conical stone of Heliopolis, associated with the creation myth and the sun god Ra? Or was it also seen as a point of convergence for cosmic energies, a kind of antenna connecting the earthly realm with the celestial? The inscriptions found on surviving pyramidia certainly emphasize this solar connection and the king's union with the sun god. However, given the pyramid's overall function as a resurrection machine, The Pyramidion likely played a multifaceted role, perhaps as the point where the king's soul, his biya, would depart or enter the pyramid on its journeys, or as the very tip of the spear piercing the heavens. Some theories even suggest it might have been believed to attract or channel celestial power, or even to ward off evil forces. The debate isn't about if it was important, but about the full spectrum of its symbolic resonance. You can picture the ceremony that might have accompanied the placement of the Pyramidion. Priests chanting, incense burning, perhaps even the pharaoh himself present to witness this final act. It marked the completion of the physical structure, the moment when the pyramid was truly whole, ready to fulfill its sacred function. Once the Pyramidion was in place, any remaining scaffolding would be removed, and the masons would complete the final polishing of the casing stones, working their way down, leaving behind a perfect, gleaming monument. The very shape of the pyramid, culminating in this single point, is powerful. It draws the eye upwards, towards the sky, reinforcing the idea of ascent, of connection with the divine. The Pyramidion was the exclamation point on a colossal statement of faith and power. Its absence on the Great Pyramid today is one of the reasons the top looks somewhat flattened and unfinished. We can only imagine what it must have looked like with its original, perhaps gilded capstone in place, a brilliant focal point against the Egyptian sky. The materials used for pyramidia were often different and harder than the main casing stones, basalt and granite being common choices. This wasn't just for show. These harder stones would better withstand weathering at the exposed apex of the pyramid. They were also often intricately carved with the king's names and titles, and religious iconography. The Pyramidion of Kanjur, a 13th dynasty king, for example, shows him offering to various gods and includes spells. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were magical and protective texts, ensuring the Pyramidion fulfilled its sacred role. It was a concentrated dose of divine power and royal identity, right at the very top. And as you stand there, looking up at where it once gleamed, you can appreciate that this small, relatively speaking, stone was, in many ways, the most important piece of the entire colossal puzzle. The pyramid stands complete, a magnificent, gleaming beacon on the Giza Plateau, crowned with its dazzling Pyramidion. From the outside, it's a picture of serene, geometric perfection, a silent monument to eternity. But what about the inside? What secrets lie within this colossal stone shell? You now find yourself taking a cautious, metaphorical peek into the inner sanctums, the labyrinthine passages and hidden chambers designed to protect the pharaoh's mortal remains and his fabulous afterlife trousseau from the unwelcome attentions of tomb robbers, who were, unfortunately, a persistent menace even in ancient times. It's a journey into a world of carefully engineered security and profound ritual significance. It's important to remember that the internal structure of a pyramid wasn't an afterthought. It was integral to its design and construction, built concurrently with the core. The architects had to plan these passages and chambers with incredible precision, ensuring they aligned correctly and maintained their structural integrity as millions of tons of stone rose around them. The primary goal of this internal architecture was twofold: to provide a secure and eternal resting place for the pharaoh, and to facilitate, through ritual and magic, like the pyramid texts inscribed in later pyramids, his successful transition to the afterlife. Security, however, was a major concern. Think of it as the ultimate ancient Egyptian panic room. The typical Old Kingdom pyramid, like those at Giza, usually had a relatively simple internal layout compared to some of the more complex tombs of the New Kingdom, like those in the Valley of the Kings. However, simple is a relative term when you're dealing with multi-ton granite portcullises. Generally, you'd have a descending passage leading from an entrance, often on the north face of the pyramid, aligned with the circumpolar stars, the imperishables, which the pharaoh hoped to join. This passage would lead down, sometimes deep into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, to an unfinished subterranean chamber, the purpose of which is still debated. Perhaps a decoy, a symbolic connection to the underworld, or an earlier plan that was superseded. In Khufu's Great Pyramid, for example, you have this descending passage, but then, uniquely, you also have an ascending passage, cleverly hidden and branching off from the descending one. This ascending passage leads up to the famous Grand Gallery, a stunning, high, corbelled corridor that is an architectural marvel in itself. The Grand Gallery, in turn, leads to the King's Chamber, the main burial chamber, located roughly in the center of the pyramid's mass. Khafre's pyramid has a slightly different, though still complex arrangement, with two entrances and passages. Menkaur's is different again. There was no single standard internal blueprint. Each pharaoh's eternal home was, to some extent, custom designed. The historical fact here is the use of massive granite portcullis blocks as a key security feature. These were huge, thick slabs of granite, sometimes weighing many tons, designed to slide down into grooves and block passages, sealing off access to the burial chamber after the funeral. The King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, for instance, was protected by a series of 3 such portcullises in an antechamber. The idea was that once the pharaoh was interred and these portcullises were dropped into place, the tomb would be impregnable. Good luck getting through 3 multi-ton granite doors without attracting attention, Mr. Tomb Robber. This leads to a quirky and rather ingenious tidbit: the plug blocks. In the Great Pyramid's ascending passage, after the funeral, several large granite blocks, which had been stored higher up in the Grand Gallery, or so one theory goes, were designed to slide down the passage, completely blocking it. These plug blocks were only slightly smaller than the passage itself, making them incredibly difficult to bypass or remove. It's a very clever, if somewhat brutal, piece of engineering. The problem for modern explorers, like Caliph al-Mamun's men in the 9th century CE, who were the first to tunnel into the Great Pyramid in historical times, or so tradition holds, was how to get past these. They famously and laboriously had to tunnel around them through the softer limestone of the pyramid's core. It's a testament to the determination of both the builders and the eventual breakers of these ancient security systems. You can imagine the atmosphere inside these passages. Cool, dark, and utterly silent, save for the echo of your own breath, or, back then, the hushed movements of the funerary procession. The air would be still and heavy with the scent of stone and, perhaps, the faint aroma of resins and oils used in the burial rituals. The passages are often quite low and narrow, forcing you to stoop, adding to the sense of entering a restricted, sacred, and slightly claustrophobic space. It wasn't designed for tourist comfort. There is, as always, scholarly debate surrounding many aspects of the internal features. For example, the precise function of the so-called air shafts, or star shafts, in the King's and Queen's chambers of the Great Pyramid is a classic puzzle. These are 2 narrow shafts, about 20 cm, 8 inches square, that extend outwards from each chamber towards the faces of the pyramid. They don't seem to be for ventilation in the modern sense, as they were originally sealed at their inner ends. One popular theory, championed by scholars like Virginia Trimble and Alexander Badawi, is that they were aligned with specific stars or constellations, like Orion and Sirius, associated with Osiris and Isis, that were significant in Egyptian afterlife beliefs, perhaps to allow the pharaoh's soul to ascend to them. Rudolf Gantenbrink's robotic exploration of these shafts in the 1990s and early 2000s famously discovered small sealed doors with copper handles, deepening the mystery. What lies behind them? More shafts? Symbolic chambers? The lost remote control for the TV? The debate continues, and each new robotic probe sends ripples of excitement through the Egyptological world. Another debate revolves around the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. Despite its name, given by early Arab explorers, it's unlikely it was ever intended for a queen. It's undecorated, and its exact purpose is unclear. Was it a Serdab chamber for a Ka statue of the king? Was it an earlier abandoned burial chamber for Khufu himself? Or did it serve some other symbolic or ritual purpose in the king's journey? The name is catchy, but probably a misnomer. The king's chamber itself in Khufu's pyramid is a masterpiece of sober grandeur. It's lined entirely with massive, beautifully fitted blocks of red Aswan granite. The sarcophagus, also carved from a single block of granite, sits at one end. It's famously slightly wider than the entrance to the chamber, meaning it must have been placed there during the construction of the chamber, before the roof beams were put on. Talk about planning ahead. Okay, lads, sarcophagus is in. Now you can finish building the house around it. Don't scratch the granite. Above the king's chamber are 5 relieving chambers, a brilliant piece of engineering designed to distribute the immense weight of the masonry above, preventing the ceiling of the king's chamber from collapsing. These were not meant to be seen. They were purely functional, yet they contain more of that fascinating work gang graffiti, including mentions of Khufu's name, which helps to securely date the pyramid. So, while the outside of the pyramid was a public statement of power and divine connection, the inside was a hidden, sacred space, a fortress designed to protect the pharaoh and facilitate his eternal journey. It was a world of stone, darkness, and deep symbolic meaning, a silent testament to the Egyptians' profound belief in life after death and the extraordinary lengths they would go to ensure it. You've marveled at the quarrying, the hauling, the meticulous stacking of stones, the gleaming casing, the symbolic pyramidion, and the secret inner chambers. But underpinning this entire colossal endeavor, like the hidden foundations of the pyramid itself, was a logistical operation of staggering complexity. How do you feed, house, water, and generally keep alive and functioning an army of thousands of workers for decades? You're now shifting your gaze from the skilled masons on the pyramid face to the equally vital, if less glamorous, support network that made it all possible. This is Nile-side catering and ancient HR management on an epic scale. Imagine the sheer number of mouths to feed. Estimates for the workforce on the Great Pyramid vary, but numbers like 20,000 to 30,000, though perhaps not all at once with rotating crews, are often cited. That's a small city's worth of people, all needing daily rations of bread, beer, the staple drink, safer than untreated water, and a good source of calories, vegetables, fish, and, as we've seen, a surprising amount of meat. This wasn't a bring-your-own-lunch kind of operation. The state, meaning the pharaoh's administration was responsible for provisioning this army. The key historical fact here comes from the excavations of the workers' village, Hayt el Ghurab, at Giza, led by Mark Lenner and Zahi Hawass. Archaeologists have unearthed vast quantities of animal bones, predominantly cattle, sheep, and goat, along with fish bones, pottery for bread making and beer brewing, and evidence of large-scale food preparation facilities. Analysis of these bones indicates that thousands of animals were slaughtered to feed the workers. We're talking about a daily delivery of fresh meat, not just dried rations. This points to a highly efficient system of livestock raising, transportation, perhaps driven on the hoof from agricultural estates across Egypt or ferried down the Nile, butchery, and distribution. It's like running a massive continuous barbecue, but for a divine construction project. You can picture the scene in the workers' village, a short distance from the pyramids themselves. Bakeries are in full swing, with workers kneading dough for thousands of loaves of bread, baked in conical clay molds. Breweries are fermenting barley for the daily beer ration, a vital source of sustenance and morale. No beer today, lads? Right, that's it. We're on strike. No pyramid for you, Pharaoh. Okay, maybe not quite like that, but keeping the workforce happy and hydrated was crucial. You'd see kitchens with large cooking pots, butchers expertly carving up carcasses, and scribes meticulously tallying supplies, checking off deliveries, and ensuring that each work gang received its allotted share. It's a hive of activity, smelling of wood smoke, baking bread, roasting meat, and fermenting beer. A stark contrast to the dusty, stony environment of the pyramid site itself. This brings us to a quirky and rather tasty tidbit about ancient Egyptian bread and beer. They were dietary staples, but also closely linked in their production. Bread was often made from emmer wheat or barley. For beer, they would often use lightly baked, crumbly beer bread, which was then crumbled, mixed with water, and allowed to ferment, sometimes with dates or other flavorings added. So, the bakeries and breweries were often closely associated. The beer was probably quite thick and nutritious, more like a liquid porridge or gruel than the filtered stuff we drink today, and likely had a relatively low alcohol content, making it a good source of daily hydration and calories. You wouldn't want your highly skilled granite block placer to be 3 sheets to the wind by lunchtime. Beyond food and drink, there's the matter of housing. As mentioned, the workers' village had organized barracks or galleries that could sleep large numbers of men, as well as smaller houses for more permanent staff or overseers. These weren't luxury accommodations, but they were functional, providing shelter from the elements. Water, a precious commodity in the desert, would have to be brought in regularly, likely from the Nile or nearby canals, probably transported in pottery jars by donkey or by dedicated water carriers. Sanitation would also have been a major concern for a settlement of this size, though direct archaeological evidence for ancient latrines or waste disposal systems at Giza is still being studied. Keeping disease from sweeping through the workforce would have been a constant challenge. Medical care was also provided. As we touched on earlier, examination of skeletons from the workers' cemeteries near Giza shows evidence of healed fractures, amputations, and even, remarkably, trepanation, holes drilled in the skull, possibly to relieve pressure. These individuals had clearly received medical attention, sometimes quite sophisticated for the era. They weren't just left to die if they were injured on the job. This suggests the presence of physicians or skilled healers as part of the support staff. You want your experienced stone setter back on the ramp as soon as possible, after he drops a small rock, or a large one, on his foot. There's a scholarly debate concerning the organization and administration of this vast logistical enterprise. Who was in charge? Likely, it fell under the purview of the vizier, the pharaoh's chief minister, who often bore titles like overseer of all royal works. Beneath him would be a hierarchy of officials, scribes and overseers, responsible for different aspects: food supply, tool manufacture and repair, labor recruitment and management, record keeping, papyrus documents from later periods, like the Abusir papyri from the 5th dynasty a bit after Giza, give us glimpses into the meticulous record-keeping involved in running a royal mortuary cult, including inventories of temple equipment and schedules for priestly duties. Similar meticulousness would have been essential for the pyramid construction projects. We can imagine warehouses stuffed with tools, ropes, timber, pottery, and raw materials, all carefully accounted for. Usarib. Have you seen the spare copper chisels, size 3? We're down to our last dozen, and the Friends of Khufu gang are complaining their edges are dull again. Think about the supply chain. Copper had to be mined, often in the Sinai or Eastern Desert, smelted and transported. Timber crucial for sledges, levers, scaffolding, and fuel was scarce in Egypt and often had to be imported from places like Lebanon, the famous cedars of Lebanon. Grain for bread and beer came from the fertile fields along the Nile. All this had to be coordinated, transported, stored, and distributed efficiently. It's a testament to the organizational capacity of the ancient Egyptian state. This wasn't just a building project. It was a demonstration of the pharaoh's power to command and control resources on a national scale. So, while the pyramids themselves are the most visible legacy, the invisible infrastructure that supported their construction, the city of workers, the supply lines, the administrative systems, is just as impressive in its own way. Without this well-oiled logistical machine, the stones would have remained in the quarries, and the pharaoh's stairway to the stars would have remained an unfulfilled dream. It's a reminder that behind every great monument, there's a whole lot of very clever, very organized, and probably very tired catering staff and project managers. The last block is set. The pyramidion gleams. The casing stones shine with a brilliance that almost hurts your eyes. The bustling workers' village is slowly emptying as the great project winds down. The sound of chipping stone and hauling chants fades, replaced by a more profound silence, the silence of eternity. You stand back, metaphorically speaking, and gaze upon the completed pyramids of Giza, these artificial mountains that have pierced the sky and will now stand sentinel over the desert for millennia. It's time to reflect on their enduring legacy, these echoes in eternity, and what these ancient stones, now weathered and stripped of their original glory, but no less majestic, continue to teach us. The most immediate legacy, of course, was for the pharaohs themselves. These pyramids were intended as resurrection machines, ensuring the king's successful journey to the afterlife and his eternal union with the gods. For a time, they served this purpose, housing the royal mummies and their funerary equipment. But the allure of the riches buried within proved too strong. Despite the ingenious security measures, the portcullises, the plug blocks, the hidden entrances, almost all the pyramids were plundered in antiquity, often within a few generations of their construction. It's a rather poignant irony. These ultimate fortresses of eternity were ultimately breached by mortal greed. Well, Hemiunu, the granite portcullis held for a good 50 years. After that, not so much. Turns out, people really like gold. Yet, the plundering doesn't negate their significance. The pyramids remained potent symbols of royal power and divine connection. Later pharaohs continued to build pyramids for centuries, though generally on a smaller scale and with less durable materials. Perhaps a tacit admission that they couldn't quite match the Old Kingdom giants, or perhaps reflecting shifts in religious emphasis towards other types of temple complexes, like those at Karnak and Luxor in the New Kingdom. But the Giza pyramids, particularly Khufu's, remained the benchmark, the ultimate expression of pyramid building. The historical fact is that the pyramids of Giza, especially the Great Pyramid, have been objects of awe and wonder throughout history. They were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and they are the only one of those 7 still standing. From Roman emperors who came to marvel at them, to Arab caliphs who tunneled into them, to medieval pilgrims, Napoleonic scholars, Victorian explorers, and modern tourists, they have exerted an irresistible pull on the human imagination. They have inspired countless theories, some sensible, some utterly bonkers. Aliens, Atlanteans, ancient superlasers, you name it. Someone has probably proposed it as the real secret of the pyramids. This enduring fascination is a testament to their sheer scale, their precision, and the profound mystery they still hold. This brings us to a quirky and rather lovely legacy. The pyramids have served as a kind of historical anchor, a fixed point in the deep past. Because of their durability and the writings of early historians like Herodotus, they have helped us to understand and date ancient Egyptian civilization. The king's lists, like the Turin Canon or the Abydos King list, provide a chronology of pharaohs, and when we can link specific pyramids to specific kings, often through inscriptions found within or nearby, like the workgang graffiti mentioning Khufu, it helps to pin down timelines. They are like giant stone calendars, marking out the reigns of these ancient rulers. It's quite something to stand before a structure and know with reasonable certainty that it was built around 4,500 years ago by people whose names we still know. The legacy also extends to engineering and mathematics. While we may still debate the exact methods for ramp construction or stone lifting, the finished products stand as undeniable proof of the ancient Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of geometry, surveying, and large-scale project management. They pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible with the technology available to them. They learned how to quarry, transport, and precisely place millions of tons of stone. They understood structural loads and how to compensate for them. Those relieving chambers above the king's chamber are a prime example. This knowledge, developed and refined over generations of monument building, was a significant intellectual achievement. There is inevitably a scholarly debate about the broader impact of the pyramid building age on Egyptian society. Did these massive state projects stimulate economic development by creating demand for labor, resources, and specialized skills? Or did they, as some have argued, overstretch the resources of the Old Kingdom, contributing to a decline in centralized power at its end? It's a complex question of ancient economics and socio-political dynamics. Building a pyramid was an enormous investment. It certainly focused national effort and resources, but the long-term costs and benefits are still discussed. Was it a glorious expenditure that forged a nation, or an ultimately unsustainable vanity project? The truth, as often, probably lies somewhere in between. It undoubtedly showcased the pharaoh's power and united the country in a common purpose for a time. But such intense, prolonged efforts can also strain even a powerful kingdom. As you gaze at these silent giants, now silhouetted against a sky turning soft with the approaching dusk of our imaginative journey, you can feel the weight of all those centuries. They have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the births of religions, the march of countless generations. They have endured scorching sun, desert winds, earthquakes, and the relentless curiosity of humankind. They stand as a profound statement about human ambition, our capacity for incredible creativity and organization, our fascination with eternity, and our desire to leave a mark that outlasts us. They remind us that even with what we might consider primitive tools, the power of a shared vision, meticulous planning, and sheer human determination can achieve the seemingly impossible. The pyramids are not just piles of stone. They are storehouses of history, ingenuity, and the enduring human spirit. They are a message in a very large bottle, sent across the ocean of time, still speaking to us today, inviting us to wonder, to explore, and to learn. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows from these ancient wonders. The air cools rapidly. The stars, the imperishables the pharaohs sought to join, begin to prick the darkening sky, just as they did for Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. The pyramids seem to draw in the silence of the desert, becoming even more majestic, more mysterious in the twilight. They are a final, powerful testament to a civilization that dared to dream on a scale that still boggles the mind. And as you stand there, a tiny speck in the face of such monumental antiquity, you feel a sense of connection, a whisper from the distant past. The builders are long gone, their voices silent, but their work, their legacy, endures. It's an echo that reverberates through eternity, a story written in stone for all time. Now, as our journey through the age of pyramid builders draws to a close, let the hustle and bustle of the construction site fade into the quiet dignity of the finished monuments. The dust settles, the tools are put away, the last worker heads home. What remains is the profound silence of the desert night, punctuated only by the whisper of the wind around these timeless structures. Feel the cool night air on your skin, a welcome relief after the imagined heat of the day. The brilliant white of the casing stones now reflects the soft glow of the moon and the myriad stars, turning the pyramids into ethereal, ghostly beacons under the vast canopy of the heavens. The sharp geometric lines soften slightly in the darkness, lending them an even greater sense of mystery and ancient power. The sounds of our journey, the chipping of chisels, the chanting of hauling gangs, the murmur of the workers' village, all recede, replaced by a deep and peaceful stillness. Allow your mind to drift with that stillness. Let the sheer scale, the incredible effort, the profound beliefs that fueled this endeavor settle into a sense of quiet wonder. These colossal structures, born of human hands and divine aspirations, now rest under the silent watch of the cosmos they were built to emulate. There's no need to analyze further, no need to question. Just let the image of these magnificent, moonlit sentinels fill your mind. Feel the immense peace of the desert at night, a peace that has enveloped these pyramids for thousands upon thousands of years. Let that deep ancient calm seep into you, relaxing your body, quieting your thoughts. The story of their creation is complete, and now, like the pharaohs they were built for, they rest in timeless majesty. Allow yourself to rest too, drifting gently towards sleep, accompanied by the silent, enduring echoes of eternity.